Hi, welcome to Fort Steele Heritage Town. Today we are in Jack Corrigan's harness shop and I'm going to show you how to make a leather dog collar. Now, leatherwork has been an art for generations that has provided humanity with various items to help us in our daily lives, such as belts, bags, saddles, scabbards, anything that you can name out of leather. They've been around for a long time. Now, leatherwork does take a little bit of an upfront cost if you're wanting to get into it, but it is well worth it if you do enjoy making things with your hands. Let's get started with our tools. For tools, you're going to need an awl or some kind of scratching tool so that you can mark the leather for any little things that you're going to have to do. It's essentially like your pencil. Next, you don't need these, but they are quite handy. This is an edger. This is specifically a number 2 edger. What this does is when you're working on the leather, it takes off the edge and chamfers it nicely so that you can get a nice finish on the edge and burnish it. Next, you're going to need a slot punch. This punch allows us to punch the slot where the small little middle stick of the belt buckle will go through. Next, this is an English point punch. This allows us to create that nice point on the end of, say, a belt or the dog collar so that it goes through the belt buckle all nicely. A hole punch. This one is an adjustable hole punch with multiple different sizes so that you can punch all the holes that you're going to need. This one is quite handy as you don't have to switch tools constantly to get a different size of hole. You're going to need a soft mallet of some kind. Now, this mallet specifically is made of rawhide. The reason we use rawhide or any other soft material such as bakelite or rubber is so that when we're working with our tools, say this tool right here, the English point, and we're working on it, since we have a soft mallet, it's not going to peen over or damage the tool at all, such as a steel hammer would. And you're also going to need some sort of template, or you can just look one up online, print it out, and use it to mark the spots for your belt buckle and your little holes. You're going to need a hard surface of some kind. Here we have a little small piece of steel. This acts as an anvil, and that's so that we have a hard surface underneath our leather whenever we're punching holes or doing any other kind of work, so that it doesn't deform the punch in any shape or form. If you don't have access to a piece of metal, you can also buy small pieces of granite or stone. These are quite nice ones here, and they work just as well. On top of our anvil, we have a small piece of old leather that we use just to make sure we don't damage our tools or the anvil. You're going to need a piece of cloth or canvas if you're doing burnishing on the side of your leather in tandem with the edger. And lastly, we have our nice Fort Steele stamp here that we are going to be placing on it to add a little bit of character. For hardware, you're going to need a belt buckle of some sort, a keeper or D-ring of some sort, some rivets, and of course, your leather. Let's get started. The step we are going to do is we are going to use our English point to cut the end of the dog collar right here. So, lining it up with the leather. It has 2 small sides, and this is an inch English point, and I have an inch piece of leather, so it's quite good to line up. Cut through. Now you can see we have a nice little point. So we don't need that anymore. Next step, I'm going to take this small template right here, which has the center punch hole and the 2 other holes for the rivets, and the buckle will go right in there. So I'm going to line that up with the end of my leather, and it doesn't matter if my marks are center right now, because I can always center them later. This is just mainly for depth and spacing. So using my awl, I'm going to mark my leather. Now I have a series of small holes on my leather piece. So now I'm going to work on getting them as best center as I can, just by looking. That one's pretty good. Oh, look at that. All right, so next, I'm gonna bring back my anvil back in and my leather piece on top, and using the slot punch, I'm going to find where my little slot's going to be. If you don't get it perfectly center, it doesn't really matter for the slot punch. Give it a few good wallops. That out of the way. And now we have a nice center hole. So Next step is our hole punch for these small holes for the rivets of our dog collar. So my rivets I have are 2-piece rivets, that's meaning they have a little spike here and they have a little cap, and when these two are smashed together they will form a very strong rivet. So I want to match the hole in my hole punch best to the size of the center spire of these rivets as I can, and that is the smallest setting on this little rotary hole punch. So lining it up, there's one hole, 2 holes, 3 holes, 4 holes. So now I have the centerpiece for the buckle, and we can even test how well it works. Lining up the 2 holes, that is where our buckle will be. So now that it's test fit, we will do one more quick step. We are going to take our number 2 edger. Now, the number 2 edger, they all come in different sizes, and the number associates with how much material it's going to take off the end. So, lining up one side, just going to line it up and push. You can see it took off a little string of leather, and now this corner is chamfered. We'll do the same with the other side. Another little string off, go around the English point with it. English points are always one of the harder ones to do with the edger. And we'll do the end. Then flip it over, and we're going to do the same on this side. One piece off. 2 pieces off. Do the English point. And this side right here. So, now we have all the edges edged, and you can see they're kind of rounded and they're a little bit sharp right now, but we will fix that with our canvas pad after we do one more little step. So now taking the other template we have, this one just marks the holes of our collar. Line it up as best I can. And using the awl, we will mark all these little points. Now I will center them just by vision. Again, if it's not perfect, it doesn't really matter, as you can always fix it with your hole punch, and if not, the holes will usually line up anyways. Now for this side, you're going to want to pick a side on your rotary hole punch that matches roughly with the size of the centerpiece on your belt buckle. This one right here is quite large, so I'm going to use the largest setting I have. Line it up and punch the hole. There, now we have all the holes on one side for our buckle to go through, and then we have all the holes on this side for our buckle to sit in. So we can do one last test fit before we move on, just to make sure everything is still going, because after we finish this, there won't be any turning back. So we see the belt can go through and it locks in place. All right, we'll move on to our next step now. So the next step we're going to do over here is using something called a splitter. Now, if you don't have access to a splitter or even know what a splitter is, you can always do this next step with a knife, because all we're going to be doing with this is splitting the leather down so it's thinner essentially, which makes it easier for riveting and a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. So using this splitter, I'm going to pull the handle up, which releases this little roller down here, and placing my leather in. I'm going to roughly eyeball where I want it to be, push down a little bit, and lock it down. Then, using a good pull, pulling the leather through. Now that I've used the splitter, you can see this line right here of how thick the leather used to be. It's now quite thinner, and it's more easily malleable, and it'll look more aesthetically pleasing for the dog collar, but still just as strong. Back from the splitter, as you can see, it's quite a bit thinner here now. We are going to burnish the leather using our piece of cloth, which I have wetted down with water. Now, what the water will do is it'll absorb into the leather and it'll allow us to glass over the edge a little bit, just by using friction. So, taking our piece of wet cloth, I'm going to run it over the edge of the leather, pushing in one direction. So I'm going to push towards the English point. Some people also burnish with a piece of wooden dowel and they spin it really fast, or they work back and forth really fast. But if you're using cloth, which is easier to find, you just work in one direction. Around the top of the collar, we don't need to worry as much. Now we have a much smoother side, so I will repeat that on the other side. Taking our buckle, we are going to install it onto the dog collar and fold this bottom piece over as such. Get it nice and tight, make sure everything can move around. And this first hole right here, we are going to line up with the hole underneath. We're going to take one of our rivets and push it through one side and the other side. Now taking our cap, place the cap on top. This is not the first time I've messed up a rivet. Rivet's out. Let's try again. Let's see how this goes. Taking another cap, placing it on, grabbing my tool. Much better. Now, the next step, we're going to take our D-ring and slide it over top and get it between your first hole here, which you just put a rivet in, and the second hole right here. So, finding the hole again, place our rivet through one side and the other. And before you start, make sure your D-ring is inside right here. I've made the mistake before of not putting in the D-ring and being a very sad leather worker afterwards. Place the cap on top. Grab your small peening tool. And gentle strikes straight down to set your rivet. We are going to place our Fort Steele stamp onto our dog collar utilizing the help of this tool right here. This is a screw press. This presses material, applying pressure with the help of a large screw. The reason we are going to use the screw press instead of a hammer is this stamp is quite wide, so using a hammer, trying to get equal pressure onto it to have it stamp nicely is a difficult task. So the screw press comes in nicely. So I've wound the screw press all the way out. I'm going to line up the dog collar roughly where I want it to be and take the Fort Steele stamp and line it up as well. Then, slowly going to wind the screw press down. Feel contact, give it a nice bit of torque, hold it for a second, and withdraw. Now that we have finished all the steps, we have a finished dog collar. I would like to say thank you for joining me today at Jack Corrigan's Harness Shop here at Fort Steele Heritage Town.